The 30th anniversary of the big one at Blackpool Pleasure Beach is fast approaching, but due to some unfortunate timing for the Pleasure Beach and celebrating its anniversary, the big one is about to lose its record as the UK's tallest roller coaster, a record it's held since 1994. So does that mean the big one is going to become an irrelevant roller coaster, or is it still going to be Blackpool Pleasure Beach's signature attraction? And what is the future of the big one at Blackpool Pleasure Beach? So hello, I'm Scott. You're watching Your Experience Guide, and thank you for choosing to click on this video and watch it. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the big one's future at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. And the reason I'm going to talk about that is because quite often, whenever we post anything about the big one, whether it be on YouTube, our Facebook page, Twitter, anywhere, or to be honest, when anyone posts about the big one, there's always comments about it should be removed and replaced with a B&M hypercoaster or an Intamin Giga coaster, or it should be RMC converted, or it should be fully retracked. There's never really many comments anymore about how good the big one is. So I thought with the anniversary approaching, it's a good time to look at the future of the big one, because with it losing its record, it's interesting to think what Pleasure Beach might do. Are they going to make it taller? Will they remove it? Will they convert it into something else? There's so many things that they could do, including just leaving it as it is. In a recent vlog of ours from the Pleasure Beach, I did mention that there's a couple of rumours going around that Blackpool Pleasure Beach will no longer be doing Big One retracking in collaboration with Tazica, who are a local Lancashire company that have worked with the Pleasure Beach for the last 5 years on retracking various sections of the big one. Now, of course, this is not something that has been confirmed by either the Pleasure Beach or Tazica, but always with Pleasure Beach, there is always rumours about rides being built, ride removals, and all sorts of other things. And this is just another in a very long list of rumours that are coming out about the park in 2024. So assuming this rumour is actually true, and we're not going to see any retracking on the big one this winter, and maybe the winters that follow, it does kind of open the question of what is the future of the big one? Because the reason that the big one has been getting retracked over the last couple of years is not because enthusiasts have been saying it's too rough, is not because the general public have been writing into the Pleasure Beach and saying the big one's too rough. It's for engineering and maintenance reasons. The big one is an old coaster using old technology, old steel, in a very questionable area in terms of the weather. It's been battered by the Irish Sea and the Blackpool conditions now for the best part of 30 years. So of course it's going to be having a lot of wear and tear issues. And when you think about how often the big one was operated in its early years, with Pleasure Beach running from like 10 in the morning through to midnight, that track and that structure has taken a fair old battering from all of the elements, whether it be the weather or it just being operational for a very long time. The wear and tear is obvious, and that is why in its 30-year history it has had a lot of retracking work done. If there is no retracking work done this winter, it doesn't necessarily mean that the big one is now perfect again and doesn't need any further retracking, because as far as I'm aware, there was a lot of plans to do other areas of the ride, including the helix after the mid-course brake run, or the block brake as some of us call it, and also the turnaround area above the Grand National. These are two areas of the big one that have been considerably rougher than anywhere else on the ride since the other bits are retracking, but also they seem to be getting worse. So it does make you wonder, like, what's going to happen now? Is another company going to come in and do the retracking? Have Pleasure Beach found an alternative to Tazica? For example, Premier Rides have recently retracked the Loch Ness Aerodynamics roller coaster, Busch Gardens Williamsburg. It's getting a lot of good reviews. It looks like Aero Track. Is that an option that Pleasure Beach could be looking at? Potentially. Or are Pleasure Beach looking at something else with a big one? Is it maybe going to be converted to a RMC? Now, the reason I've mentioned RMC is because I feel like it will be a really interesting project for Rocky Mountain Construction. Obviously, they've worked with a lot of wooden roller coasters over time, but if they were to do a conversion on the big one, I feel like it's a project that they would really enjoy getting their teeth into, because they wouldn't have to do a lot structurally to the big one. Of course, take the track off, but the actual structure itself is probably perfect for an RMC project and could potentially be extended in height for it to take back a UK record. Now, of course, this wouldn't be the big one taking back the record off Hyperia. This will be a converted version of the big one structure going higher than Hyperia. Now, of course, if they're going to do that, to take back the height record, they can't be going off the basis of sea level, because then Hyperia is technically still going to be taller than it. So they need to be looking at potentially going an extra 25, 30 foot to take that record back. But as much as I don't want to see this happen, I feel like it is a real possibility in the future if the funds are there for Pleasure Beach to convert the big one into a Rocky Mountain construction roller coaster. Now, of course, this is all just speculation at this point. There is no official confirmation that there will be no further retracking from Tazaka on the big one. It might not happen this winter, but let's say in 2025 it could do, or further down the line, 2026, they could go back to Tazaka and maybe look at doing a retrack then. But it is a rumour that won't seem to go away at the minute, and it's going to be an interesting one to follow. We could well get to November or December, close season, see big one track being lifted off, see Tazaka vans turning up at Pleasure Beach. A few months later, see new track being lifted into place, which Tazaka have done for the Pleasure Beach. But at the minute, there is rumours that that is not going to be happening this winter. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Now, going on to the subject of removing the big one. I have spoken about this in another video, but I'm going to bring back that subject now, because I honestly don't think that is an option for Pleasure Beach. And this is the reasons why. Firstly, there's the removal of the track. Now, having watched this be done over the last 5 years, where they've removed track for retracking work and purposes, usually this can cause quite a bit of disruption to Blackpool's seafront and the road network. Usually they have to close a lane, so there's temporary lights. This means that heavy machinery can get in and out, but in terms of disrupting everyone else, usually the temporary lights causes queues on either side. Then sometimes there'll be delays while they're lifting a piece of track off, bringing a lorry in, taking the lorry out, moving the crane, setting up the crane. There's so many moving parts and things going on while they're taking the track off, and it can take up to a full day to do this, which means, of course, then that there is disruption to the road network all day. Now, imagine that they're taking out all of the track. This is going to cause a lot of disruption over probably a couple of weeks. But also, this is not something that Pleasure Beach can do while the park's open, because access to these areas whilst the park's open is always going to be difficult, especially if the park is operational, especially if you've got things like Icon, Big Dipper, Infusion, Steeplechase, Nickelodeon Street, all operating with people on whilst things are going on with the big one structure. So this is the kind of thing that can't be done when the park's open. It'll also be the same when it would come to taking down the structure of the big one. Now, of course, taking the track off is a big job in itself, but taking down the whole structure of the big one is a massive job and will require access from inside the park and outside of the park, and probably require the whole area of that seafront road to be closed off. Again, causing more disruption for people who live in Blackpool or working in Blackpool in that area. So it's a massive amount of disruption in the park and outside the park. So I honestly don't think it's a job where they could look at it and go, right, we're going to take down the big one in November and December, and by May we're going to have a brand new roller coaster open, taller than the big one, built by B&M, Intamin, Mack, whoever. I don't think that they could do a like-for-like hypercoaster sort of replacement in terms of where it will go into the park over one closed season. So assuming that this did happen and the big one was removed, we'd probably be looking at a case where the big one is obviously not there for at least one season, but there's no guarantees that a replacement for it could be built over one season. For example, when Icon was constructed at Blackpool Pleasure Beach, it took 2 years to do it. The ride was announced in 2016 to be happening, but groundwork had already begun at the end of 2015 when they removed the Tom Sawyer Bridge and cleared all the space underneath it. But a lot of the groundwork took place out of park hours and during the closed season. The following years, during the closed seasons, again, is when a lot of the work took place, especially the vertical construction of Icon, all took place outside of the park season because of the disruption to everything else going on at the park. Building Icon during the park season would have meant closing things like Big Dipper, Infusion, possibly the big one, possibly Steeplechase. So you have to think about how the size of Icon compared to the grand scale of the big one. I just don't think you could replace the big one and build a brand new coaster to take its place all in one closed season, which would put Pleasure Beach in a position where they've got no iconic tall roller coaster for at least one season, potentially 2 seasons. Now, when you look at how Pleasure Beach is doing at the minute in terms of the park is very quiet, can they really afford to go at least 2 seasons without the big one being there or something that's like it? Not only that, I also think the cost of replacing the big one in terms of removing the existing structure and replacing it with, say, a B&M hypercoaster, I think you're going to be talking at least 20, 25 million. And again, is that the kind of money that, one, Pleasure Beach are going to throw at this kind of project, and two, are they going to make that back? Are they going to get return on investment for making such a massive investment on replacing what is actually a very popular roller coaster, by the way? It might not be popular with roller coaster enthusiasts, but with the general public, it is a very, very popular roller coaster still. And I think taking that out, putting something else in, putting all that time, all that money into that kind of project, I'm not sure it's the right thing to do. I mean, if they do it, fair enough, it'll be a massive project, but I'll be amazed if they do it. Now, this video might well come back to bite me on the backside in, say, 3 or 4 years' time when they're pulling down the big one and replacing it with a B&M hypercoaster. If so, I'll own it and be like, yeah, I was wrong. But I honestly don't see that happening in the immediate future. So to conclude on this subject for now, you've probably guessed by this point that I really don't think the big one is going to be removed in place of a B&M hypercoaster, an Intamin hypercoaster, or a Mack hypercoaster or Giga coaster. But in terms of retracking, then it's something that's definitely worth keeping an eye on. Because of course the retracking work was being done because the track's fatigued, because the track's old, because of wear and tear. And of course it probably still needs that kind of work doing. But if it's true about Tasika not retracking it, then it is really going to be an interesting one to follow. Because that could mean it's a sign that Pleasure Beach do have bigger plans for it going forward in terms of maybe a full retrack by somebody else, an RMC conversion or a different type of conversion. It will be interesting to follow. Now before I go, I do have a little request. Please, if you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. It's a little thumbs up below. Please subscribe, and if you haven't already, please check out our recent vlogs from Wallaby Holland, Wallaby Belgium and Efteling. It was a really good trip and we really enjoyed doing those vlogs. Many thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.